many things are possible, where maybe Chinese investors might come in, maybe Russians come in and have a different migration policy and buy real estate on some Greek islands. So maybe a new model for Greece. This was a view of our American friends. Most Europeans at the meeting had the idea of further supporting the meeting, out of supporting Greece out of solidarity, saying we can't let them go. It's impossible. If Greece is falling, the whole of Europe might fall. The few participants from Asia, Africa, Latin America, they actually supported more the American view and say, what's happening in Europe might even train down the rest of the world, and we have to fix the problem. But I think fixing Greece is almost impossible. So let them go and try to keep the large economies of Spain, Italy, Ireland, even France, of course, is facing now some difficulties, keeping them afloat and trying to keep together the rest of the Eurozone.
In your report, you say that the outlook for 2012 was rather cautious among many of the business leaders. Why do you think that is? And if we do have a major global recession in 2012, what should be the policy response?
I think there will be a recession. We're already feeling it now here in Europe. There's some optimistic signals in the US. The employment figures actually quite good. And we see a divide between Europe and the rest of the world. Some people call actually the time we are facing in Europe a so-called lost decade. Remember what happened in Japan 20 years ago. It was like a balance sheet recession. Some people said no growth, stagnation, deflation, and basically also silvering of society, not enough young kids, and of course huge pension fund liabilities, a lost decade. Japan for the first time actually is now a trade balance deficit, and it was always on the contrary. And you see what can happen to Europe, I think, just following this Japanese model. And I'm not sure, really how to solve it. I think what we have to do maybe is to rethink our whole social framework here in Europe. When we see what's happening on a Friday afternoon, people go back, leave the office at around maybe 1 o'clock, even earlier. They go to the mountains, to the lakes, to the seashore, and come back on Monday morning during the weekend. People usually even not using their Blackberries. That's a bit the European attitude. And very long vacations, 6 to 7 weeks. I think we have to change this to be more competitive and going back to 2 to 3 weeks vacation type of schedule. And we have to rediscover our hard work. I think that's what we did 50 years ago after the war. And we lost it because, we are a bit of complacent now, and we're getting very, very lazy.
It seems that we've learned how to live the good life when a lot of people in Asia are working very hard at reaching the standard of living that we enjoy in Europe. Do you think that these very difficult structural issues and also just issues of mentality can be fixed, and how do you go about trying to do that?
I think it all starts with education. If you look into the vision of a young European, young American, maybe is to go into the healthcare business, to maybe like a ski instructor, and to enjoy life. In Asia, it's quite different. Maybe read the famous book called The Tiger Mom, which is written by a Chinese American, saying that hard work it's the way to go, and from very young age, basically pushing your kids to learn the piano, to go to school, to learn languages. And we are not doing this in Europe anymore. Of course, there's always the elite, people going to Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard, but it's just a minority. But what I see now, it's very interesting that even Asians now are discovering the European style of life. I go to China quite often, and I see that young couples during the weekend go shopping. And shopping really is shopping for European luxury goods. And they're spending money. They're now spending a lot of money to travel. And what I see also is that in some coastal areas in Asia, in China, work is getting too expensive. And work is now shifting to places like Vietnam, Indonesia, even Laos, and maybe recently to Myanmar. So Chinese now start to outsource and offshore, and they start to enjoy life. So we see a circle, and I would not be, surprised to see China maybe in 10, 15 years experiencing the same kind of problems we have in good old Europe.
There have been some academic papers or concepts around, is there another way to measure how well an economy or a country is doing rather than just looking narrowly at GDP, and perhaps including some other measures like quality of life or quality of the environment? We know in some emerging countries economic growth has come at quite high a price, and in some inner cities it's the air quality is very low. What's your view on some kind of a more holistic, perhaps, assessment of how well the world is doing?
I lived in Beijing in the 1990s, and one reason actually, or the most important reason I left Beijing was the quality of air. It's just not a place you would like to stay for a few more weeks or even years. And then of course traffic. Traffic is something horrible in those mega cities. I just spent last week in Moscow, and you spend a lot of time just in traffic, which is awful because you lose so much time. It's so much stress. You're always late to your appointments. So can I go to a city like Zurich or to smaller places here in Europe with a high quality of life? And I think that's maybe the right measurement, not just the quantitative numbers of GDP, but measuring the quality of life. There's an interesting country, we all know it, it's Bhutan in Asia, and they are measuring actually the happiness in the country, saying, it's important to see that the citizens are happy. Of course, it's very difficult to measure happiness. How can you measure? And you can maybe just ask, how do you feel? And people in Bhutan maybe can't really give you a comparison because they don't really know how happy people are in the outside world. But yes, I think we have to add a second layer to GDP, which is measuring quality of life, happiness, education, and all that together. I've been to another interesting place recently, to Macau. Macau, part of China, actually is the highest life expectancy in the world. And maybe it's a good food because there's a lot of fish and good Chinese food, but it's also because there's not much stress in the city. In Hong Kong, just next door, there's a lot of stress. In Macau, it's a very easygoing life. Of course, I'm very happy to have the casinos, and a lot of mainland Chinese come on to gamble. It's a very easygoing life, but I would say, why not? If an economy can grow, and Macau is also a very high GDP by the way, but life expectancy is very important, and also the social context, the time we can spend with our families. I think that's very important.
You have tremendous intelligence within your community on global events, given that you really are focused on emerging markets in some of the countries that some other events perhaps neglect to some extent. I'm wondering what sorts of opportunities and challenges do you see arising from the Arab Spring and some of those folks finally starting to live in freedom?
We originally did events on China, India, and Russia, the BRIC countries. The B is still missing, actually, in America we are working on. But from the beginning we said we should also include the Arab countries. And they are not really part of the BRICS, it's a different kind of animal. And the Arab world, in a way, is divided. We have the poor countries of Northern Africa, of the Levante countries, and of course the Gulf countries. Take Doha and Abu Dhabi, two of the wealthiest cities on earth, and actually Qatar is now the richest country on earth. So quite a spread around the Arab world, and we've seen still there's quite the same model in those countries where you have a very strong government which is not democratically elected, and this led to of course difficulties in terms of human rights, in terms of expression of your views, in terms of even entrepreneurship, as many of those countries are state-driven with large state-owned economies. When we created our Global Arab Business Meeting in 2010, it's held actually in the UAE, in the Emirates, we had the issue of education, the issue of participation society very high on the agenda. And we've been very lucky to work with the ruler of Ras Al Khaimah, one of the Emirates, to work on the agenda and try to spur development not only in the UAE but around in the Arab world, focusing on education. And we've been launching several initiatives around education where young people in the Arab world can really grasp now opportunities and realize their dreams. What we see now in this so-called Arab Spring, and it's actually not a spring anymore, it's a very cold winter, because we see that in most countries the Arab Spring movement came to a halt. Take Egypt. Mubarak is gone, but the military took over. Now we just elected a new government, but we really don't know yet the direction. We don't know if it's a very extremist government or is it more like a liberal government. So it's still all open, and I wish the Arab region all the best. And if we can give and make a small contribution to the betterment of the situation, we will do it as Horasis, because we invite the main business leaders from the region to join hands and to think about strategies, how to overcome youth unemployment and to give the Arab world a new economic hope.
Economically, the Gulf countries have really excelled over the past decade. Do you believe that they have diversified in some respects, perhaps a little bit away from oil and gas, or are they going to be in a lot of trouble if there is a downturn in the energy markets?
Right, some of the countries definitely diversified. Take Dubai, for example. Dubai very much went into the whole area of tourism, lifestyle, but also IT, education, and new industries. Some people say that Dubai even diversified too much, putting too much money into the sand. I think Dubai went the right way, because you can't just live from your oil and gas reserves. You need more, and you need to develop a sustainable model for your economies to thrive also in the future. Now, I see some countries, and you mentioned Qatar before, trying to build very much strength in research and development. There's, for example, the Science and Development Foundation in Doha, where now a lot of multinationals actually put their R&D facilities into Doha. And Doha itself also trying to diversify by using its own sovereign wealth fund, investing into the car industry in Europe, investing into the chemical industry, investing into the IT industry. So I think it's the right thing to do, and of course those countries are also lucky as they have got the money to do it. But they should maybe also support some of their poorer neighbors in the Arab world, including Egypt, Levante, Morocco, Tunisia, and of course now Libya. Libya needs to be reconstructed, and I think the Arab League should take a major role in reconstructing Libya, and maybe Syria in the future, helping the Arab peers to grow.
Let's talk just a bit about Russia. You have the Global Russia Business Meeting in Luxembourg this year. Recently, equity market valuations have been very low in Russia due to corporate governance concerns. What's your view on whether Russia is going forward truly and how it can go there? What's your view on the likely political landscape, perhaps looking a couple of years out, and then how the businesses in Russia are evolving?
Well, I'm just back from Russia and some fresh thoughts on what happened. I even experienced the protests on the streets of Moscow last Saturday, and you feel there's certainly some change in the air. People are, trying to see where the future Russia will be going, which direction. President Medvedev was talking about modernization a lot and saying Russia is too much depending on oil and gas, and he's right to think so, and he's putting a lot of efforts into trying to build an IT sector, a strong R&D base in Russia. Maybe you heard about the Skolkovo project, which is a large cluster of IT development, similar to the Silicon Valley, or Rosnano, the same thing in the area of biotechnology. So they're trying to diversify the economy, and I think it's the right thing to do, because still now today, Russia's economy